Welcome back to another episode of Natural AF.
I'm your host, Isaac.
And I'm Alexa.
And this episode, we're going to step away from our guest interviews, and Alexa and I are going to share and open up about some of our relationship. This is something that we actually get asked quite a bit on, and we've got some interesting stories because we've both been through the shit.
Yeah, and we're sprinkling some breadcrumbs through this episode, but one of the inspirations to sit down and record this is actually because we are in the very early stages of putting together our first group coaching program that we're going to offer together. I'm working on my own group coaching program for women. And that's always been our vision is we want to do something together that's centered around relationships and that's open to both men and women. And then individually, I will offer work with women, and Isaac will offer work with men, which he's already kind of stepped into a little bit last year doing a men's group. And we're so excited to be finally doing this. But yeah, on reflection of, putting together the group coaching program, we really did reflect on like all the mistakes that we made in relationships. So we thought
even some that we've made in this relationship but the part that I'm really excited about is learning how to pick up and repair and use those learning experiences, I'll call them, to bring us even closer.
Yeah. And we use the term mistakes very loosely because everything's a learning. Mm-hmm. But, we did the best with what we knew at the time, which was very little. There was so much that I didn't know just in terms of different relationship dynamics, attachment style, masculine, feminine polarity. There's so much that I was just totally clueless on. And so, yeah, we've kind of distilled it down to sort of 5 major themes.
Yeah. As well as, sorry to break in, but as well as the conditioning.
Yeah.
I haven't really seen, I've been through plenty of marital counseling in my time, and never ever heard or discussed with any of the counselors societal conditioning, mental conditioning, brainwashing.
And which is a huge, and our audience, you guys that know us and listen to this podcast, that that's a huge theme throughout the podcast because it's prevalent throughout our whole lives. There's so much. I don't think anyone escapes societal conditioning at this point in time that we're in. Super excited for the next generation of kids. I think they're going to be very different, depending on which communities they're
and we're
involved
speaking
in.
About it from an empowering perspective.
Yeah.
Because the other side of it is like it's such a freaking razor to walk where noticing the conditioning and then just falling into negativity and like, oh, look, they're conditioning us again. It's just, there's no victim mentality in anything that we do about that because it's like, once we see it, we're empowered. We know we can choose differently because we have. And and we're continually looking and seeking and learning, and just am excited to share that with you.
Yeah. And of all the episodes that we do, we would absolutely love feedback on this one. We do often get feedback from a lot of our audience and friends of ours that listen, but this would be great if people listen and they're just like, yes, this totally resonates, or I'd love to hear more on this, because we will take all that feedback and put it into the group coaching program. Mm-hmm. And of course, we can always deliver more episodes on this if people are wanting that at a later stage.
Yep. And be prepared. There might be some topics we cover that might be a little, stepping on some toes. That's all right. We're just sharing our real experiences and what we've learned, and some of the things that we thought we were right years and years ago. Now we're realizing like, that was actually conditioned garbage, and it's time to let go. We know you're ready for it. We know you're up for it. So that's why we're doing it.
So before we get into it, as always, we'll give you some natural art form updates because there's a lot happening with natural art form at the moment.
Right. Yeah. So currently we are sponsoring a 10-week boxing camp at Passage Fight Club in Byron Bay. So I brought some of the product, gave it away to the attendees of the camp, and I'm hearing some really good results back already. I was rubbing some into one of the guys' backs last night because we were boxing, and he kept grabbing his back and standing up. I was like, come on, we got a sample jar right there on the shelf in the pro shop at Passage, and rubbed it in. But he was telling me he's been using it on his shoulders. Boxing is a shoulder burner. If you haven't used those muscles a lot, it's noticeable, and it's definitely helping. And I'm excited to help people understand the natural remedy side, because a lot of the people that come are still using, pharmaceutical stuff. Opportunity to showcase a comparison of how you felt when you're just doing your normal thing versus using Alleviate. And the results are speaking for themselves, and people are loving it.
Yeah, so super exciting. We're definitely getting a lot more involved with other athletes and stepping into the sponsorship. But also, we have an exciting announcement that we are going to be at the Living Free Festival again this year, and we will have a stall there with Natural Art Form. And this year, we're actually going to have our full product range on offer, which is super exciting because last year, actually, we'd only just launched the deodorant just before the festival, and they were in different pots. And yeah, it was so different. We've come so far since then. So I'm super excited to be there again with Natural Art Form. And both of us are also presenting within different capacities, which is also super exciting.
So I'll be co-emceeing it. I'll be helping out, keeping the flow going and helping people maximize their time there. And Alexa's going to be doing a workshop that's really, really interesting and exciting.
Yeah. So of course, totally in line with Natural AF and what we're all about and the work that I do. So I'm going to be presenting a workshop on aligning the unconscious mind. I think this couldn't be more crucial when it comes to exiting the rabbit hole. When we come out, we're trying to reintegrate back into the world and seeing it through a completely different lens. It's so important to start bringing that unconscious stuff into the conscious, transmuting it and aligning it with who we actually want to be and the life that we want to live. So I'm so pumped. I can't wait for this year's festival. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I've done emceeing a couple of times. I was kind of roped into it a little bit with the Bear Fest back in the States, and it was fun. I really enjoyed it. And I've learned a little bit more about what an MC actually is supposed to do because I had no idea. Yeah, I'll do whatever I can to help promote and support and just make things more fluid and help things function as smoothly as possible. Really looking forward to all the speakers and the musicians, and there's going to be a bunch of new bands and stuff that I'm excited to hear. And it's going to be a blast. Family friendly.
Yeah. So it's just going to be even bigger and even better than last year. It's still in the same place in Pillar Valley in New South Wales. This year it's the 22nd to the 24th of August. And we will have a discount code. It just isn't live yet. So as always, if you want to stay up to date with everything that we're doing, we will post an update as soon as that discount code goes live to our mailing list. So head to naturalartform.com, join the mailing list, and you'll be the first to receive that, and you'll get a sweet discount on your tickets.
We hope to see everyone at the second Living Free Festival. And with that, we'll get into the episode. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a really packed episode for you today. We've got 5 relationship pitfalls that we both have done. We're going to talk about our mistakes, what we've learned in relationship, and hopefully steer you away from some of the pitfalls and help you thrive in your future relationships. In your future romantic endeavors. So this is a topic that, one, it's near and dear to our heart. We're both very appreciative of where we are now, partially because of the contrast of where we've come from in relationships. Mm-hmm. So we're very passionate about this subject. And it's also something that we know a lot about because we're just individuals that like to deep dive into stuff and learn about it.
And it's something we get asked about a lot. Like I've been doing some of these like niche finder activities that, ask you a bunch of questions about like when you're offering service to someone, like what would be your niche? And one of the questions is like, what do people ask you advice on the most? And for me, it's relationships. People always come to me and ask, what do you think of this? And, what have you and Isaac done? And I really does warm my heart because I do also have a lot of people that have told me or us that they also look up to our relationship in a lot of ways. And that's really beautiful. So we thought we'd put this together, and also just a little teaser, nothing set in stone yet, but we are in the process of putting together our first group coaching program that will be based entirely on relationships and to really map out for people how they can do it differently. So super exciting. And so we thought we'd deliver this just reflecting back on our own relationships and all the mistakes that we made and why our relationship now is so different. And we've kind of boiled it down to sort of 5 main themes or unhealthy patterns that we kind of saw in all of our previous relationships.
Yeah. It's going to be not a all-encompassing list. Obviously, each one of these we could probably talk about for an entire episode. So we're going to go through them kind of fast so that you're not here forever and getting too much information. But it's an overview of, at first, what we went awry with in relationships, but then we want to leave you on a good note, on a high note, and how we corrected all these, because they're also, it's amazing when you get out of that mess. And that's where we at.
All right, let's get into it.
What's the first one?
First one is rushing into the relationship, which we both did lots of times.
This is huge.
Yeah. So, and there's so much to this, but I've said this often, I think in previous relationships. I kind of fell into all my relationships. There wasn't a lot of conscious choice about the partner I was choosing, what I wanted for the relationship. I was never actually really ever seeking out a relationship. I was like, oh, this person likes me and, you know, we're sleeping together now. So, you know, and I just would kind of fall into this pattern. And yeah. And I mean, let's just stop on that point, because sexual intimacy too soon is, I definitely highly recommend against it when starting a relationship, if you want a really deep relationship with someone. Because I know for me, I would sleep with that person quite early on. And, you know, as we know, even biologically, especially for women, we tend to produce more of these hormones and the endorphins and all the lovey-dovey feelings. And it really does confuse things, because then you start to feel this really strong connection to someone that's not really rooted in an actual deep connection. It's rooted more in the physicality.
Yeah. I can see this being a double-edged sword too, because it's such a, well, I'll speak from my own experience in a previous relationship. When I tried to hold off from having sex right away, it made the other person pursue me way harder, which pushed me into another danger zone, which was, it felt really nice to have someone that was attractive pursuing me really hardly, really whatever. And so that kind of ended up being, it looped me right back into rushing into the relationship, you know? And, but yeah, definitely the physical intimacy early on, it doesn't feel like the wrong move. It feels like the right move when you're in it. And that can be misleading, can be, you know, part of the wool going over your head, because you're getting all these endorphins, you're feeling wonderful, and you could be walking into a trap. And I literally could describe some of my previous relationships as that, where I'm going into very dangerous situations for me, detrimental stuff, thinking that it's the right move because I feel really good. That's it.
Yeah. And I'm not a fan of like this, wait 2 dates or 3 dates or 5 months, or like, I don't think you can really put a number. Like, I don't think there's a formula to it. I just think you have to be at a point with that person before the sexual intimacy happens, where your foundation is already so solid, and that you know that you want to be with this person and you're choosing them, and there are no questions about like whether they're right for you or not. Because I think that's a huge one that I quite often hear, is when they're not sure if they're the right person, but they're sleeping together and the sex is really good, and then they kind of make all these excuses for all the good stuff, which the sex is included in that. And it just confuses things. So I'm not going to sit here and say like, yeah, wait 5 dates or wait 2 months or whatever. Just be at a place where you're solid in knowing this person, and the sex isn't going to just confuse you or make it a little bit harder to form a solid connection. Another big one was, and I'll leave this to you because you said this was big for you, was like looking for the right person instead of being the right person.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of come down to ultimately was what led me to get out of the full pattern that I was in. But while I was still trying to figure it out after my whatever failed relationship, I realized that I didn't have clear criteria for the kind of person that I wanted to be with. And so that's an important part. But the higher version of that is, once you figure out the kind of person that you feel like you deserve, you need to focus more on becoming the kind of person that would attract that kind of person, being the right person. And then an even higher version of that is just like becoming the best, highest expression of yourself, period. Because you're not comparing yourself to someone based on someone else's qualities. You're just comparing yourself against yourself from a place of love, not a place of like low self-esteem or whatever, but like, I can go here and I will. because that's just what I do. I rise. If that's the kind of person you are or you want to become, you'll fare much more brilliantly than if you're just trying to get, someone in your life thinking that having the right partner will change your life for the better. It's like, you be the change. It's so cliche, but I cannot stomp my foot. Like, this is really, really the key. Be the change that you want to see in the world. Or as Robert and Kim Kiyosaki say, for things to change, first I must change. You should just meditate on that every day for the rest of your life if you're stuck, and you'll start to see a different perspective.
Yeah. And I think you just mentioned something that is so important too, is like not knowing what you want in a relationship. So that was, for me, I was never clear on the type of person I wanted to be with, the relationship that I wanted. And then as I kind of moved through, so I sort of had like 3 serious relationships, and I sort of after the first one, I was kind of like, oh, well, I know I don't want that, but still wasn't clear on exactly what I wanted. Went to the next one. It was like a little bit better. I said my second relationship, I always said wasn't my first love, but it was my first true love. So I was like, oh, well, this is a step up. But again, there was like lots of issues, never was clear. And same thing, I left that relationship. There were more things added to the list that I didn't want, but still wasn't clear on exactly what I wanted. And it wasn't until I met Isaac, or before I met Isaac, that I actually started looking at, well, what is it exactly that I want? Not only in that person, what are the qualities I want, but what do I actually want my relationship to look like? And a huge part of that for me too was human design. So one of the arrows in human design, which is next to the body graph, it's part of the body graph, but there's 4 arrows, and one of them will tell you whether you're a specific manifestor or a non-specific manifestor. And up until that point that I found out that I'm a non-specific manifestor, I was trying to manifest like a specific manifestor. So I was like literally had a bit of a laundry list of what I wanted. And for me, that's not the best way for me to manifest. So for me, it's more about getting really clear on how I want it to feel. And so for me, that was so important for me to actually get clear on, how do I want this relationship to feel? How do I want to feel with this new partner in my life? And when I got clear on that, it was like, what do you say? There was like an energetic hook that I put into Isaac, and I just reeled him in.
Yeah. I'm come skipping across the ocean all the way down to Australia. Yeah. And it was just a matter of, right things at the right time for both of us. Cause it wasn't like I was dragged away from my life there. I was actually ready to pull up and move, and getting, I was literally liquidating a business and selling equipment and moving out of a house and all that stuff. And I was like, you know what? I want to live a different life. I'm done with the pattern that I've been stuck in for so long. And it really was like a karmic thing where like a big karmic cycle had ended, and that I was leaving. And then now I'm open to something new and exciting. And I do have a very strong adventurous spirit. I like to travel, I like to go places. But one thing I was going to ask is the feeling, or kind of comment / ask, do you think men have a lot of like maybe an aversion to thinking like that? Like if a man is a specific or a non-specific manifestor, right? You're a non-specific manifestor.
Yep.
If a man's a non-specific manifestor, and it's better a strategy for him to feel or to imagine what it would feel like to have the thing that he wants. I feel like a lot of men are kind of going with the cultural mainstream, where it's not about feelings. It's like, nah, like you don't want to be ruled by your feelings because that's more feminine. And this will get into a different topic. But just on that, just the manifesting or deciding what you want being a list of things or being a list of how you want to feel about things.
Yeah.
Well, it's blocked from that.
I can't speak. Generally, yes. Like generally we see that in society where men are so disconnected from expressing their emotions healthily. But in terms of like that specifically, like the human design aspect, you're not being ruled by your emotion. So it's not this like raw, unfiltered emotion and you're being ruled by it. It's about connecting to whatever it is that you want and like how you want it to feel. So, and we all do that, like men or women. And I'm just going to give this example because we've been talking a lot about money and sort of the energetics behind money and things like that. And just like how you feel about money. Like there are lots of men that, you know, want to provide and protect. And one of those ways is to make money. So to make money for them feels good.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just about that, like connecting to whatever it is that you want. So in terms of like, we're talking about relationships here. So if a man that's a non-specific manifester wants to manifest the right relationship, the right person for them, it's about really sitting with how you want it to feel. And that can come, like for me, I wrote down how I wanted it to feel. I like lists. And so, but that process of doing that, I actually was literally sitting with my journal and just sitting and contemplating, like, how do I want it to feel? So part of that process of writing it down was actually bringing those feelings into my body as well. But you can do that sitting in meditation. You can do visualization, as long as you're really connecting to those feelings of whatever it is that you want. And we are going to get more into, because this also comes into the masculine feminine integration within both of us, which we'll get to. So we won't get too much into that now.
Yeah. I just want to update so another thing I pull from Kiyosaki, which granted I might talk about him a lot, but that's because I really deep dive on different philosophies that I think are useful and apply them. And if they work and repetitively work, I know it's a good one. So he pulled from Buckminster Fuller, be, do, have. And I was just thinking as you were talking about this, because we're talking about emotions, you can update that and say, feel, be, do, have. So a lot of people they think like, if I just do the right things, if I brush my hair, if I wash my armpits, I'm dressed nice and I put on the right cologne, if I do the right things, then I'll go out there and I'll try, I'll get the hot chick, I'll get the woman of my dreams or whatever. That's like very base level. That's how I was like in my early 20s. Later, I realized being who you are dictates what you do, the kind of behaviors you do, the patterns that you run, and then that dictates what you have. Another thing that I am just learning recently in the past year or so is feeling, and what we confirmed with Mark Devine on that episode, which is when you sit there and you visualize and you meditate and you feel what it would feel like to succeed, to win, whatever, you identify with that feeling as if it's happened. That affects how you're being in that moment. You're being a success, you're being powerful, you're being true, you're being victorious, whatever. And then your patterns and behaviors after that follow on naturally. And then what you have will change. And that is essentially a formula for manifestation in a very tangible way that we do all the time, whether we're aware of it or not. But I'm just putting a name to it. I'm expanding the be, do, have with the feel, because it's something I'm starting to practice more and more, actually daily, where before I go to bed, I will sit and meditate and inquire how I'm feeling. If there's anything in there that's not serving me, understand that I can shift that, feel differently. That'll affect my being, which will affect my habits. And then like we just had a conversation about that this morning, because I was talking about in my business, I feel like crap a lot of the times because I'm doing so many things that aren't in my normal wheelhouse. And so there's not a lot of confidence there. So it's important to shift the feeling around it so that I go and do those activities with a different attitude in my heart, and I'll have different results.
Yeah, because especially in terms of relationships, like what just came up for me as you were talking about that is I did see an Instagram post from quite a well-known woman on Instagram. I won't name her because I have nothing against her, but I totally disagreed with this post. But basically, and this is men tend to say this a lot, but what this woman was saying is that basically like dating is a numbers game. So she's like, so I worked out if I wanted to meet a man, I had to swipe this many times a day and for this long, and I had to go on this many dates and whatever. And I was like, whoa, that is like, look, different strokes for different folks. If it worked for her, but it's still, she said it took her 14 months to find the person she's with now, like her husband or whatever. I'm like, I did more internal work and I've got you within a few months, which is like, I'm not going to guarantee that that's for everyone because we're all on our own journey. But I don't know. To me, again, that's
it goes
just
back to that doing, huh? That's
it's
more
external, and it's externalizing. Yeah. It's like, you know, and I have heard this before, like with men, where they're just like, it's just like a numbers game. So I've got to go out. I'm just going to get like 10 numbers and whatever. And it's just like, to me, there's not a lot of substance in that, because what's the energy behind that? Quite often the energy.
And what are you trying to get?
Well, that's right. But a lot of the time it's the energy behind it is desperation or like this wanting because you don't have, and like what you're talking about. And I also wanted to say for anyone that wants to really dive into this that hasn't already in terms of Joe Dispenza's work, I just recommended this book to a friend today, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. That book changed my life and the way that I looked at like the way we manifest. And yeah, that's what he talks about too, is like feeling the thing as if you already have it. But when we're not in that place, we're trying to manifest things from a place of wanting, from a place of lack, from a place of desperation, like whatever it may be. So that's such an important point, is to be able to sit with yourself. And quite often the things that we're wanting in a partner, in a relationship, we're the ones blocking that. It's not because the right person isn't coming along. It's because there's something within us that's blocking that, which we're also going to get to.
Yeah. And just, we could just keep going and going. I do want to point out though that, because I love these books and a lot of the books have the secrets in there, but I want to point out just for my own, like, not an ego thing, but I'm just like, I want to say that I'm not coming from this from a place of stuff that I've read about. It's not stuff that I know about. It's stuff that I know. And while I haven't manifested everything in my life exactly the way that I want it in the end, there has been some very clear moments where I understand this to a very innate degree where, like for instance, talking to Mark Devine about the Navy SEALs brought back a lot of memories about me going through Special Forces selection. And I had to go through it twice. The second time was so outlandishly difficult, but I was so certain that I would get it. You know, I started it with a broken foot, which is insane, unheard of, because you're expected to perform at a very, very high level and you're running every single day, ruck marching, carrying stuff. But there was no doubt I was emanating from a place of being already that kind of person. And I felt like I'm just there for the selection. I'm just here to be sorted. I've already made it. They just haven't found out yet. And I was so certain about that because of the way I felt. And I just felt when I trained every time, I'd literally go out in a blizzard in Wyoming, super, super cold. And I'd do 8-mile road marches or 12-mile road marches. And I'd pour water in my boots before I went and did that. I was just doing all these really hardcore things to condition my mind. I would sleep on the floor. And to me, it was just like, no one else is doing this kind of stuff. Like I'm feeling a bit like, yeah, like ahead of the game because I'm doing things that others won't. Because there's a saying, do what others won't today, and you'll be able to do or accomplish what others can't tomorrow. And in relationship side, I think there's a big part of that. If you really look through all the different points we're going to get to, and you start actually peeling this apart and potentially going through our training course in the future, there'll be a lot of different practices and stuff that you can start integrating into your life, and you will literally be a different person, which will attract a completely different caliber of person in your life.
Yeah, totally. And so the last point in terms, because it does kind of tie into, so rushing into the relationship. And then as part of that, there is no solid foundation for the relationship. This was a big one for me in my previous relationships. I know for you too. And this is one of the biggest differences in our relationship now. And which also ties into going back to like, so as most people know by now, like Isaac and I are from 2 different continents. We're living in different parts of the world when we met. So we only could communicate over the phone, texting, FaceTiming, all of that.
Thank God for the internet.
Yeah, I know, right? For like, what was it, 5 months? 5, maybe close to 6 months before we actually met in person. And so because that's all we had, we got to know each other on such a deep level. And so there was...
it started out as friends too.
Exactly,
we weren't even in a relationship when we first started talking, and just building a friendship.
Yeah. And it's interesting actually because all of my previous relationships, I wasn't romantically interested in them at first at all. But for me, that's something that has always resonated with me though, because I know when I did online dating for the first time, that's what I didn't like about it. I actually didn't like that there was already the expectation that this has to be a romantic thing. And because I met some guys that I met and I was just like, I'm not feeling it romantically, but he's really awesome. Like I could totally hang out with this guy and be friends and whatever. And they would just like shut it down, which is fine. That's totally fine. I got no issue with that. But I'm just that type of person where I am very friendly and I like to take people on face value. And just because it's a male, it doesn't mean like it has to be romantic.
Yeah.
So I did like that we started off as friends first too.
Yeah,
but
same. So I felt like talking to you was almost like a reset in a way. When I was in high school, I was a bit of an outsider because I moved to the country in Texas in this really tiny town. But I had friends that were guys. Some of the friends were on the football team. Some of the guys were like skaters. And then I had a bunch of friends that were girls. And I would just kind of hang out with both. And like sometimes I go hang out at the girls' table at lunch and just sit there. And for some reason, I just wasn't super bored hearing women talk about girl problems. And I also didn't hold any shame or embarrassment feeling like, you know, a little gay guy or whatever, like hanging out with the girls. I was just like, yeah, okay, that was, you know, I'm done with that. I'm gonna go hang out with the guys now.
Well, and
but hanging out with you on the phone, chatting was like having just a good friend back in high school.
Yeah, well, and it's like, I think most women will agree with me that like the best men in relationships tend to be men that have either lots of sisters or they have really good relationships with their sister/sisters and their mum, or they had like not lots of girlfriends, but they had like, you know what I mean? They hung out with girls. They know how to treat a woman. I think most women will agree with me there and can relate to that if they've been in a relationship with a man like that. But we digress a little. So I just bringing it back to like building that solid foundation. A big part of that was we didn't have the physicality. We didn't have the sexual intimacy. Now, mind you, we talked about sexuality a lot. And obviously, because we went really deep, we went into things that we needed to heal and things that, you know, like I was quite promiscuous when I was younger because, again, very wounded within, like always seeking external validation and love in the wrong ways. And we talked about all of that. So it wasn't like it was like repressed at all. But yeah, there just wasn't the physicality. And so in that time that we had, we got so clear on what our values are, what direction we're on in life, like what our vision is for the future, where we're heading, like how we want to raise our kids, our boundaries, you know. And again, I just want to make it clear too, while it is so important to have these conversations before entering into the relationship or as you're building that foundation of your relationship, these are things that you do also have to revisit. It's not like it's a one and done and you talk about it once and you never talk about it again, because it is important to get clear on those things. And especially like with the boundaries, I would say, like when we started living together, yeah, there were arguments. There were, you know, we're getting used to each other's being in each other's space all the time. Obviously, we work together. So, you know, the boundaries is a big one, I think, where it's not just setting the boundary. I often say, like, I'll set the boundary, but then I don't enforce it in a lot of ways. Not so much in the relationship, but just in other parts of my life. But I think some people may do that in the relationship too, where they're like, I'm not going to accept this, but then it happens and they don't really follow through. So that's really important and to revisit those things.
Yeah. And just thinking about that too, I mean, there were times where I rushed into a relationship in the same way, like we weren't sleeping together. This is like my first relationship. But I was definitely in a relationship. I rushed in, but we weren't sleeping together. So it doesn't just have to be the physical side of it. And then we were doing a lot of the same things, like talking about all this and that and the future and all that. So you can still kind of have the same pattern where you're rushing into it. And then you're trying to like, I don't know, I guess you're there. I was there kind of getting these dopamine hits from all the fun, exciting things we had in common. And like, oh, we have that in common. We have that in common. Oh, there's so many things in common. Oh, I'm so excited. And getting way too worked up of being, you know, in puppy love. So yeah, I don't know the full solution for everyone else, but it is exciting when you're meeting people and talking to them. I think part of it is just coming from an energy that you're not there to make this like latch onto the person and make them like you by showing up as your best, which is natural and normal. But your energy is just to be real. These are the parts that I don't like. This is the parts that I do like. You don't like that. That's kind of how I am. Just being real about it. But also, we'll get into this on some of these other ones. We need to get to some of these other points, but healing inner wounds, that's going to change how the not rushing into a relationship looks.
That's a good segue because that's the next point. So this is another huge one for not only us, but something we see a lot in relationships.
I almost think this is the biggest
Yeah, for
thing.
sure.
This is like a big vortex that people need to get right.
Yeah. And so this is the lack of self-awareness and introspection and not doing the inner work on yourself first and foremost. There's so much that comes along with this. And I think...
Well, let's define the inner work.
Well, I mean, for us, and again, we've spoken about this very openly before, is that we started doing the work on ourselves and healing sort of these wounded parts of ourselves. And not just, so I just want to make it clear too that part of the work, first and foremost, like in the beginning, is actually understanding these concepts first. So understanding, like, parts work is huge. Understanding how these different parts of us kind of fragment off as children. A lot of the time as children, it can happen later in life, but it's most often in our childhood. And what happens is then when we're in relationship, when we're in this, container with this person, that's our biggest mirror, and they're constantly triggering all this stuff in us. When we like sort of lose control of the emotions and get angry or like whatever it is we react, it's this different part of us coming online. It's like our adult self, as Sarah Baldwin calls it, our adult self is gone, and this 7-year-old part of us has come online, and they're the one that's like they've taken control of the wheel.
You're literally reacting.
Yeah.
Acting again like how you did back then or how you felt back then.
Yeah. And just to really sort of exemplify this, the movie Inside Out, it's a kids animated movie, but it's a great movie to really conceptualize what's going on internally. Now they're using emotions, but it works the same as if they were different parts of you, where they're the ones coming online, and this, the adult version of you, or the part of us that's connected more to our higher self and our highest good, that's offline. And so just understanding stuff like that, understanding like what the shadow is, like we talk a lot about shadow work, like understanding what that actually means. It's like the unconscious, the stuff that's like in this sort of hidden part of our psyche that we don't have conscious awareness of, understanding how the nervous system works and how it's linked to all these things, and how things will show up in the body. Our episode with Yerasimos, or I say our, but you did the interview with him. The body is the shadow. That's the title of the episode. And it is this concept of what's showing up in the body, the feelings, the nervous system state, all these things are a really clear indicator of what's in the psyche, what's unconscious, and what needs to be brought to the conscious mind.
Yeah. Do you ever watch those? I mean, you probably don't, but the guys will understand this. When you see those, how it's made things, let's say you see the big shipping container ships, and then you get taken down into the engine room and you're like, holy smokes, like look at these pistons. It's like the size of two men standing next to each other. That's one piston. These massive underbelly of how this thing works. That's how it feels when you start to crack open this self-awareness stuff we're talking about, especially when you get into the generational patterns. It's like, whoa.
Yeah, that's another huge
like
one.
Something that's turning a wheel like this, but it's like affecting generations. Like, oh, this pattern goes back to my great grandma.
Yeah.
This pattern goes back to my father. This one goes back to his father. And we never talked about it. There's no way that I'm just playing it out consciously. It's all subconsciously, somehow, presumably in the body or the energetic field. But
well, it's literally in our DNA. Like the generational stuff is in our DNA. And again, this is why it's so important to understand the concepts. And look, you don't necessarily have to understand fully everything to do the work and to do the healing. You can absolutely do it without understanding. But I think it's so important, especially within a relationship dynamic, is actually understanding these concepts so you can see how they show up and how they play out. But the generational piece is huge because we literally carry ancestral memory in our DNA, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not, it's there. And so we can definitely play out things. And I've heard of plenty of stories of relationship patterns being played out. And then, people have looked at, and I mean, even for us, like we've looked at things that have happened in our parents' lives, their grandparents, their parents, and there's a pattern that plays out. And again, we don't have conscious awareness of it. So, so important to look at those things first and then how we put them into practice. But some of the biggest mistakes that we made in our relationships when we didn't have this awareness was, so first and foremost, like not willing to look at yourself and take responsibility. I think that's a huge one for a lot of people. And with this comes the blame. So we point the finger at the other person and it's all your fault. I did this so much in my previous relationships, especially my first true love relationship. Like, yeah, I look back now and I kind of feel bad, but it was obviously so much learning in it. But that's what I would do. I would point the finger of blame. It was always his fault for how I felt. He was making me feel that way. And I had to, it was like he needed fixing, like he needed the help, and it wasn't me. Like to some degree, I was a victim. And we will talk about this a little more later. Well, may as well bring it up now, but it'll come up in a few of the points. It's the trauma triangle. So for anyone that doesn't know what that is, it's basically if you just think of a triangle and there's a perpetrator, a victim, and a savior. And there can be different names for them, but that's basically what it is. And I was definitely the savior, but I was also a victim sometimes, where I would view him as the perpetrator, I was the victim. But then quite often it would be, well, he's the victim and I have to save him because he's the one that has all the problems.
And obviously there are some circumstances where someone is legitimately like hurting you, and violence is part of that. I've definitely experienced that in a previous relationship. And yeah, like you can feel justified in being the victim, but the true, like the higher self takes responsibility for all of that. And what I mean is I'll say I tolerated that behavior. I'd get physically hurt. I literally in a previous relationship had to sew myself up twice with sutures. I sewed myself up because I knew how, because I was a medic. Yeah. And going to the ER would take 4 hours out of my day that I didn't want to do.
And I'm glad you're talking about this, because I did want to clarify. I was like, when Isaac says his experiences, he wasn't the violent one. He was definitely not. Not that type of person.
I was kicked in the face, had to sew my lips shut, had a rock thrown at my head, or a rock statue. I had to sew my head up. Wow. And that kind of situation is like, oh, they did that. Well, I stayed in the relationship afterwards, and more shit happened, could have ended up killing me, could have ended up costing my life, literally. But I stayed there, and you can't blame the other person. It's like if I took a goanna out of the wild here and I brought it in the house and was just, and this isn't really fair to the other person, but comparing them to a goanna, I'm being nice. Okay. And closing the doors, and it just starts ripping up your shit, just starts tearing up your bed and all this stuff. I'm like, stop it, goanna. It's like, it's a goanna. It's going to do that. But if to be more kind to the other people, they're also traumatized, and their traumas actually are magnetically or energetically linked to yours, which is why they're in your life to begin with, which is also kind of why it doesn't unsettle. Like sometimes it wouldn't unsettle me a little bit, because it's familiar in a weird way. Not that anyone in my life had ever treated me like that, but it was like there was abuse on both sides of my family going back in the lineage. And so energetically, something about it felt familiar, and felt like I arrogantly thought, I can manage this. I can change this. I can fix this. Like I'm invincible. I'm not dead.
Well, and can I just say too, we always play a part in the conflict, like whether or not it's whether, in that case, it's the other person getting violent. But I look back now on the way that I would be within certain conflicts, and I was the one that was actually escalating it, like not purposefully, but I was so coming from such a wounded place and like had to be heard in that moment when I was so emotional, which is the worst time to try and resolve a conflict. And I would actually make it worse. And this is where knowing attachment styles is really valuable, because I had no knowledge of that whatsoever. I've never even heard of it, I don't think, back then. But yeah, I look back and I was definitely more, or in this particular relationship, I was more anxious attachment. He was avoidant. So when we would fight, and he would get to the point where he would literally like run away, like he would literally leave, and would drive me mental because I was anxious and I wanted, like, I need to sort it out. We need to, but I realized like I was the one that would actually push him to that point, because I would be so emotional and so activated and angry. But in the moment, I'm like, I'm the victim here. Like I would think that he was doing this to me and it wasn't fair and he wasn't listening to me. But I was the one that was actually like playing such a big part in the way that he was also reacting. Yeah. So that's a huge one.
I've definitely experienced that. So in another relationship where I was more like violent, but in the ways of like I would throw stuff not at anyone, but in general, I'd pitch a table over at extreme points where I'm just really losing my shit. And that's actually what, by the way, was a big catalyst for me to learn, like, what's the problem here? The problem's me. The other person definitely pissing me off. The other person definitely, I'm saying, this is my boundary, don't cross it. And they cross it over and over again. But it's like, why are you in that situation? Why not get out of it? Why not be more in control of yourself?
Well, that's what I was going to say. It comes down to controlling how you respond instead of just reacting in the moment.
But the other person was also trying to play the victim. And so they would push the buttons until I would explode and yell or say something mean or whatever. And then they would go and be the victim and be like hurt by it, which, to be fair, what I said was hurtful. But it's also like you had warning, 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 red light flashing, and then boom. And then it's like, oh, it's like, come on. Like I grew up with 3 older brothers, and like I just know what's going on. Like, cause I would get picked on, and I'd do the same thing with my brother, where I'd be like, stop it. And then I'd hit him and then I'd get in trouble. I'm like, I freaking warned him.
Yeah.
It's not okay, but I'm not saying it's okay, but as a kid, that's what it was. Or, you know, I hit my brother twice in our whole lives. The rest of it was like just yelling and crying and annoying my parents. And as an adult, I can say that I've acted kind of similar because I'm running those same patterns.
Yeah. And so another big part of this, because we did say like the blame, but we want to talk about projection a little bit here too, because I think this is such a buzzword and it gets thrown around a lot and people don't fully understand what it is. And I've definitely heard people use it in the wrong, like it doesn't make sense how they're using it. And I think it's because they don't fully understand it. So just to actually, I've got a definition here. So projection in relationships is a defense mechanism where individuals attribute their own unwanted feelings, thoughts, or behaviors to their partner. This can lead to misunderstandings and conflicts, as the person projecting may accuse their partner of feelings or actions that actually reflect their own unresolved issues. And so that's why this is a huge one when it comes to having that self-awareness and being introspective and actually always looking at yourself first, always. Because I mean, in our relationship, we argue about things. Like we live together in a really small place. We work together. We're in a relationship. Like, trust me, like you can't go through that and not argue and bicker ever. Like it's just normal. But yes, there are things that Isaac might do that annoy me and vice versa. I know there's things that drive me crazy. So I know that they're going to annoy my partner. But I always, first and foremost, if I'm getting really emotional about it or like really wanting to react, or if I say the thing, if I just don't have the control and I say the thing in the moment, I always look at myself and go, well, why am I so annoyed by that? And quite often it's like a little bit of what they've done, but it's mostly something within me that's annoyed about it. Or it's just the state that I'm in. If I'm really stressed, I'm way more likely to be really snipey and just, what's the word you always say? Like short. Like I can be really, and that's not just in my romantic relationships. I've been getting that feedback from my family like my whole life. So I know that that's something within me, but I also have to communicate if I'm like that, like I'm just really stressed and I'm so sorry for apologizing. And I'm so sorry for apologizing. Sorry.
I'm so sorry you made me do that.
I'm so sorry for speaking to you that way. But an apology can one little apology can go such a long way. Do you know what I mean? And I think that in relationships and within conflict in relationships, I think sometimes that's just what's missing, is just to say sorry. It can really just disarm the other person in such a big way. But instead, because again, this is a big mistake that we made, is like you get defensive. Instead, you get very defensive when someone starts saying, well, you're doing this and I hate when you do this and you're making me feel like this. And then we get defensive. And then that's when the conflict starts, because, you know, like I mentioned earlier, that's when these different parts of ourselves are coming online, and it's not two adults speaking to each other anymore. It's like a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old, or, you know, whatever ages, you know, these parts are at come online.
Yeah. And that's like all of this stuff is expanded in crazy, hard to describe ways when you're in a very dysfunctional relationship. So it's really critical for every relationship to learn part of these vocabulary words and understand what they mean and work with it. But it's absolutely critical when it comes to both protecting yourself from being in a really damaging, destructive, dangerous relationship, and also helping you get out of that situation. Because there's so many stories, and it's kind of a common trope that, let's say, a woman in an abusive relationship will make every excuse in the book to stay in the relationship. oh, my CDs are in his truck, or like, oh, I can't, I've got wallpaper coming and I'm going to do that. Like whatever this
They're
thing
usually
is,
not the excuses people make to stay in an abusive relationship. But anyway,
it is like literally sometimes, not everybody, but it can be really ridiculous, and you'll use that excuse to stay in because there's something else that you're not willing to say. So it's just literally anything you point at is why I'm staying. And I've been there because I've been in that kind of relationship, making dumb excuses. And
yeah, I think that's sorry. I just have to, because there's so much nuance to this, but in a lot of cases for women, it's more like financial reasons. If they're financially dependent on that
probably
man,
that's a bigger reason than just CDs. But I'm saying it can be
just to make that clear,
something silly. More often than not, it's something serious, and I don't want to make light of it too much. But I've been there, and to survive, you kind of make light of things that makes normal people uncomfortable.
Yeah, I get it. And it's interesting though too, to get a male's perspective on this, because quite often that's you hear of like women in abusive situations that it like the woman is the victim, but in your case it's like you were the one that was constantly being attacked. And I think for a man, it is very different reasons you would stay in that relationship, because generally you're not the one that's financially dependent on them, or you're not like looking after kids.
Yeah. And it could be something as simple as just sex. That was part of it. It was just, in my 20s, I was a little cuckoo.
But just going back to, so also just on projection, right? So we just gave like an actual kind of definition, but the way that it can show up in relationship, and again, we've kind of touched on this already. So blaming your partner for feelings you struggle with. So that's, like you're doing this and it's making me feel this way.
Sometimes
you're making me feel this way.
Yeah, sometimes I still do that one.
Yeah, Isaac does project a little. I'll give an example in a minute.
Yeah.
Seeing your past in your present. So this is a big one as well. When your partner starts projecting things that have happened to them in previous relationships. This happened to me big time in my first relationship. I constantly got accused of cheating. Now, anyone that knows me, I'm the most loyal person, like loyal to a fault. I've never cheated on anyone in my life. I've always said if I even had a thought to cheat on my partner, I would know that I shouldn't be in that relationship. And I never have. I've never once considered cheating in any of my relationships. And I constantly got accused of cheating, like crazy stuff, like crazy. It was because of his own wounding from previous relationships. And he fully just projected that onto me and in our relationship. So that's just an example of that. Accusing your partner of something you fear in yourself. So that can be similar, like a similar example of that is like, if you fear that person's going to cheat on you, it might not have happened to you in the past, but you fear that, and then you start accusing them of it because you're scared that it's going to happen. And then another big one is criticizing traits you secretly see in yourself. This is huge. And this is like, and again, this self-awareness and introspection, understanding the concept of the mirror. And really, our whole reality is a mirror of us, but in relationship especially, that person is a mirror. It's usually the closest relationship you have in your life. And so they are going to be the biggest mirror for things within yourself. Yeah. And so quite often we do criticize the things that we don't like in others, but it's because we don't like it about ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's another story I've told. I don't know if I've told on this podcast, probably, but I want to reiterate it. It's a really, really deep, it's like in the shadow, very, very deep shadow work stuff where you, and it's in the body, which is how I access this knowledge. Basically, was using a medicine ball and rolling over parts of my calf, kind of like what Yerasimos did with me with the body work, and then just seeing what came up. And I was going through just a really rough time with my previous relationship, but it was all a part of this awakening that I was really inquisitive about myself, and found out that there was a part of me that I was neglecting and feeling ashamed of. And that's how I was being treated by my partner at the time. I was feeling neglected. I kept feeling like they were directing shame at me and just hitting me with it. And I realized that's true. And I'm doing that to myself, which is, in my perspective, why that energy is showing up externally in my life, pointing at me. And I think this is speculation because I don't have a phone call with the universe where I can ask it why. Why does it do this? But I believe it does that. If you're willing to sit quietly and listen and notice things like this, it's highlighting what you need to work on within yourself. And just noticing that and bringing it into your conscious awareness will give you some sort of control and power over it. Not ultimate, but it's at least in your field of view, and then you can work with it.
Yeah.
So you're bringing it out of the shadow into the conscious mind and then working with it. And it doesn't mean you have to freaking sledge away at it for 20 years. It can be pretty quick, but just awareness is the first step.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of projection as well, it's really important. Again, this ties in with the conflict and conflict resolution, like, because Isaac does do that sometimes still. But being able to recognize it, whereas before when that was happening to me within relationship, or when I was doing it to my partner, I didn't know what projection was. Like I didn't know most of this stuff back then. So I wasn't aware that that's what was happening. Whereas now you can hear it in the language. So an example I'll give of Isaac, not because I can't think of specifics, but sometimes he'll say, and you think I'm an idiot and you think this and and he starts telling me what he thinks I think of him. And it's like nothing I've ever even thought of. Like it's not how I see him at all. And it's so clear that he's projecting that onto me because that's how he's feeling about himself at the time. Now, in the moment, I don't say to him, you're an idiot. You just think that of yourself. You're projecting onto me. Blah, blah. Like I can see it. And I obviously do say like, I actually don't think that at all. But this is a huge one. And I think we'll move this up. We were going to get to this later, but conflict and conflict resolution, we both got this so wrong in our previous relationships. And it's something that has shifted so dramatically, say for both of us within this relationship, because understanding that when you're both activated, that is not the time to resolve the conflict. It's not going to happen. Because like I said earlier with the parts work, like you're not two adults speaking to each other. You're like two children. And the most important thing is, which I think we're really good at doing now, is actually just going off. And look, sometimes within
going off. What's the word?
Oh, sorry. Going off and like going separate, like being alone. And sometimes honestly, like I will say like, sometimes I don't do that in the best way because I'll in the middle of the argument when I've reached my limit and I can't keep going because I'm so activated, I will actually just leave. But I've communicated to you before, like, you know, we've had conversations about this when I've actually said, I just can't, when I'm like that, I can't keep going. And I think a big part of that too is I'm definitely not conflict avoidant, but I didn't grow up in a household that was very like where my parents argued and screamed. And so I just don't like that. I can't hold a lot of that within my body. So and sometimes I literally just walk out of the argument when it gets to a certain point. But Isaac knows that that's just how I get sometimes. But once I've sat alone for, sometimes I only need a couple of minutes, like 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Sometimes it doesn't take that long. And then when we come together to resolve the conflict, we can actually communicate exactly how we were feeling about that situation, what was coming up for us, why, you know, quite often being a woman, like there's emotions, and usually that's what's behind it. Usually is what is behind it.
Emotions.
Well, and it's like it's the vulnerability, right? Sometimes it's just like this vulnerable part of us that doesn't want to be seen, or it feels so hard to express. And so we get this defensive part comes online, so to speak. And that's how the conflict happens. But then when you actually sit and talk about it, it's because, you know, there's this really deep wounded part that is trying to be protected.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And that goes into, I mean, with all the conflict resolution, that took a while for me. In my previous relationship, we would have arguments where I couldn't break away from it. I couldn't allow for that separation. And that's the anxious attachment style. Yeah, it's anxious attachment style. And it was also because it was a mess, but a part of me was aware very, very clearly. I don't know why I had such an awareness of it, but it was like, they're using this as a weapon. Like and I didn't have the vocabulary for it until I started learning about like covert narcissists and different things like that. And I was like, oh, I knew there was something to it. I just didn't know how to like verbalize it, but it was like withdrawing approval, but using that as a strategy or tactic to like shift you and like force you. Coercion. It's like coercion to coerce you into doing something by doing this. And it was so consistent and so irritating that I would, you know, my version of standing up for myself was like, we're not doing this anymore. And we're going to talk about it and you're going to decide and you're going to agree to never, ever do that again. That's not going to work. But But that was the ability to actually let them walk away was a really big turning point in that relationship, where I just came back home to myself. And that was a big, I can't describe, but for somebody who knows what I'm talking about, where you're in a fight, you're in an argument with your partner or other, and you can't just be like, let's take a break, let's calm down. You have to like, I need to finish this now. I can't describe how much of a breath of fresh air it is to actually have the capacity to let them walk away and be centered in yourself and calm and just be like, oh, it's good. It actually flipped. It's a totally different experience where I'm like, it's good that you're going off by yourself and like calming down and walking. I actually feel relief. I'm like, okay, now it's de-escalating.
Yeah.
And that I'm starting to feel more in love with that feeling because I can take care of myself. I can be sort of like reparenting, although I haven't gone through anything on reparenting, like to really understand how that term is used, but that's kind of what it feels like. I'm just taking care of myself. My biggest priority to take care of you is like on an airplane, oxygen mask comes down. I put it on myself first. And sometimes I literally just breathe. Other times I will light a candle and just stare at it and meditate. Other times I'll do hape and literally like just do a really powerful pattern interrupt. But what I find more and more now, it's just letting the other person walk away and you being just comfortable with yourself and loving and just knowing that when you return, trust is built and we're going to come back together in a loving way.
Yeah. And that's exactly what reparenting is. And Sarah Baldwin talks about this so beautifully. I highly recommend her podcast, guys. Go and listen. It's called You Make Sense. And it's probably one of the number one podcasts I recommend to people, like especially on this stuff, like anything nervous system, parts related. And that's how she talks about it is, especially with conflict, is that when you have that time apart, that it is a reparenting that's happening because you're this wounded part of yourself, this childlike state that you've gone into. That's what needs attention and needs care, and it needs it from you first and foremost. Your partner can't do that for you, but then you need to come together. And again, that's when the communication is really important and be able to verbalize what's going on for you. And of course, first and foremost, take responsibility for how you behaved and the things that you said or like whatever it is, because that has to happen. If neither of you can take responsibility for your own part in it, it won't be resolved. And quite often what happens is then it doesn't really get resolved. It's like kind of, which is what used to happen in my previous relationships actually, was like nothing was ever fully resolved. So it just kind of built, it was almost like this, not that we were sweeping it, not that we were sweeping it under the carpet, like there was an attempt at the resolution, but it was almost like every time there was a little bit that was left under the carpet. And then until you just had like this something that there was just always something between us, and it just seemed to build and build and build so that the conflicts would happen so often because it was just the point of trigger was just always right there. It was right there. Whereas
is that kind of the same as pushing things into the subconscious or pushing things away? You're just stuffing it down, or is this a little bit different?
I think there was a part of that. There was a part of that because I think I also wasn't able to fully express myself and how I was feeling. But that's again comes back to because I wasn't doing that work on myself. I didn't have the level of introspection and self-awareness that I have now. And that's why I would find it really hard. Whereas now it feels so easy. Like I feel the conflict resolution with us feels so easy. And when I say easy, sometimes I don't want to, like sometimes I can still feel where you want to talk about it and I can still feel I'm a little emotional, but I'll sit and talk with you about it. And then sometimes I'm disarmed and sometimes I'm like, let's just talk about this later. Like if I can feel myself start to get a bit more activated again. But I'll just give an example of something that came up for us a few weeks ago without getting into the full details. But long story short, I brought up to Isaac that, we just, so much of our relationship is work. And I'm, feeling like, and this happens a lot so many couples I know that work together can relate to this, where your relationship almost takes a backseat to work and everything else because that comes first. And there were a few days where we were kind of like having these little arguments and things and it wasn't fully resolved. And
She can be really bitch. I'm just kidding.
Well, and cut a long story short, like what it ended up coming down to, which was even a surprise to me, because again, there's so many layers on top of these wounded parts of ourselves. But I broke down crying one night, and what it came down to was like I felt like how I felt with my relationship with my dad my whole life, where all he did was work, and I didn't feel like he was ever there for me emotionally at all. Like I've, never felt like I have a strong emotional connection with my dad. And that's how I was feeling. And I broke down crying. And I was even a little shocked that that's what came up, because consciously I didn't think that that was at the core of how I was feeling, but it was. And so, and I know like even.
And you weren't saying it in a way where you weren't blaming me for any of it. You were just voicing how you're feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And that's so important too, because again, you don't want to be blaming your partner for making you feel that way. And I know too, just even in that moment too, like I felt you completely soften. Like it's like you just got it and you just understood why the previous 3 days had been the way that they were. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause it's like the fun and the connectedness and the adventure in our relationship was kind of dying out a little bit, and it feels like shit. But then you also have this more deeper childhood wounding that you've brought up before, but it's like even now we still have childhood wounds that we still carry, and they'll get triggered from time to time. So it's
even when you do the work, you're always going to be triggered. However, the more work you do and the more healing you do, I would say the less emotional charge there is behind when you're getting triggered.
Yeah. And that's just part of caring for each other. And one thing I'll say about the conflict and the conflict resolution, part of what really changed for me was when I really made a full-on commitment. That part of me that I was feeling was neglected, that I was ashamed of. That was the softer, more feminine side of me. And we can touch on this next with the feminine masculine. But what I needed from myself was to hold and love and care for that place, that wounded part of me. And then I realized how good that felt. And again, we go back to the feeling, being, doing, having, all of that. It felt so good for me to like hold that part of myself internally and just be like, and just see it and just hold it and just really let it know that it's being seen and that I'm also competent and caring and will take care of that. And I realized how I care for that feminine part of myself is going to reflect in how I care for the women in my life. And I think that has everything to do with why our relationship was such a success and a deep thing. It's like, that's how I wanted to treat someone. That's how I wanted to treat myself. And I think there was a part of you, the subconscious part, that also clicked with that, was like, that's the kind of man that I want. That's the way that I want to feel, is when I have this broken, like really, really sad part of me, are they going to hold it? Are they going to, yeah.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, this is a good time to bring in the masculine feminine integration, but to that point, absolutely. Like you hit the nail on the head, because now having the contrast of my previous relationships to now, like honestly, I can't think of anything more attractive in a man when he's doing the inner work and he's so all over his own shit. You know what I mean? Like that's, when you talk about getting your shit together, that's like getting your shit together. And I think even more so for men, because it's so common now in our society, men just are so, I don't know what single word sums it up, but what's coming to me now, not just disconnected, but almost lost in who they are. They're lost in their masculinity. They don't know how to show up. And a big part of that is because of what's happened with the feminist movement and now the neo-feminist movement, because women have become so masculine and sort of out of their natural state of being and how women are meant to be when they're really rooted in their femininity. And so it's caused men to be like, well, I don't know how to be, because women aren't accepting me to be the provider and the protector and whatever. So for me, that was like, yeah, obviously a big reason that we ended up together, and why our relationship is the way it is now is because that was one of the agreements that we made very early on, was that first and foremost came the work on ourselves. And as individuals, and not being codependent, because we also had massive codependency in our previous relationships. And And yeah, being able to do that individually, but then also doing that within our relationship and being able to do that together, but not relying on each other to do that work with or for each other.
Do you think the opposite of codependent is independent? And does independent mean dependent upon what's in here? Internally dependent?
Yeah. Well, I guess because I think interdependent is another word that, or would that be intradependent if it's internal? But yeah, I think definitely, but it's such a fine line too, because again, I think in modern society, women tend to be hyper independent, where, like I said, they can't accept whether they're in a relationship or not, because sometimes they can be in a relationship, but energetically they can't accept their man to provide and protect for them. And so there's this hyper independence. So that's obviously going too far the other way, but it is having that independence in yourself. And I actually just want to say that was such a huge shift for me too, because what I would find because I have always been quite independent and I had those sort of 3 serious relationships. Like one was a year, the next one was about 2.5 years. And the next one was only about 6 months, but we were friends for about a year prior and a year or 2 after. So that one was a little bit more complicated, but I often found that after being in a relationship, I was like, oh, I've been set free because because of the codependency, I felt like I lost my independence. And I would kind of, again, swing back the other way where I kind of would be more like this hyper independence, but that's very not comfortable for me in a bad way. That's very true to who I am. And so, I know that was something that I struggled with even early in our relationship, where I kind of battled with this, like, oh, am I losing my independence again or whatever? But like, that's the thing now. I feel that less and less. I mean, I don't really feel that at all now, but I feel like I do still have my independence. And I think that's such a big part of it, because I take full responsibility for me and what's going on for me, and how I feel isn't dependent on you. Like, yes, I can be influenced, like obviously just living in the same space and feeling each other's energy, like we can be influenced, but I used to feel like it was controlling me, like how the other person was. And I don't feel like that at all anymore.
Yeah, from codependent to codependable.
Well, let's just break down before we get into the masculine feminine integration, because there's a bit to say on that. Or do you want to, because we touched on that. Do you want to go more into that? Or?
Let's get into the masculine feminine.
Okay. And then we'll leave codependency for last, because that's a huge one in relationships, huge. And it was huge for us. All right. So what did we touch on already? So you kind of said this part of yourself. That was a big one for you, was this integrating the feminine.
Healing the relationship with my own internal feminine, just coming to terms with it. And just holding that in the way that I would hold my partner. And it's hard to describe, but like as an energy, it's more like I can sit here, I can see it. It's wanting, it's like sometimes it's almost like a child that acts up, but you know that they're acting up because they want attention. And you're not just giving in to their acting up in order to give them attention, in order to shut them up. It's more of like just authentically holding it and just being like, I see you. And when they fully feel seen, they don't act up and try to get your attention. They're just, I'm seen. I'm here. I'm accepted. I'm a part of this family. I'm a part of this internal family, this internal circle. I feel trusted. I feel like I can trust. And then that energy, it's so magical. And I think that puts especially that one that was so pushed down for me, pushed far away from me.
Well, it's repressed. This is exactly what happens with repression when we repress parts of ourselves. So in this example, Isaac's using, he repressed this feminine aspect of himself, and how it shows up quite often is it shows up in the ugliest of ways. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I love, this is why I'm like, Isaac needs to be doing men's groups, because men need to hear this from other men and how this stuff can show up.
Yeah, well, thank you. This feels really connected to what you were saying about the rest of society and how men and women are. But I think men are called toxic masculine now. You know, there's this whole thing about toxic masculine. Part of it I can dip into a little bit with women. They're more independent, but more on the toxic side. And actually the ones that are screaming the most about toxic masculine are actually the ones exhibiting toxic masculine traits. And the toxic masculine traits that also that they're kind of claiming that these men have is more of a feminine thing. Actually, it's more of a repressed feminine. They're ashamed of it or whatever. And it comes out as just uncontrolled emotion. It's like this TV show we were watching once where this guy was bothering these women on a subway. And this is, of course, a Netflix thing. So it's just ghastly in the way that they write the script. But he's like filming this girl. Was he filming her? He was like filming her.
Like
and he's
harassing
her and it wouldn't go away. And she kept saying like, go away, leave me alone. And he's like, I'm not doing anything. I'm not touching you. And he's just like up in her shit and just like being annoying.
And no one's doing anything to help her.
No one's helping her. All the men are just sitting there very passively. That's passivity. That's feminine, not high feminine, but it's a passive. Feminine.
It's a feminine quality. It's more.
Yeah. We'll say yin. We could say yin.
Yeah.
Because men have that as well, but it's a yin trait.
Yeah.
The guy up in their face, like all that stuff he was doing was passive aggressive. Passive aggressive is also yin. It's a feminine. It's a negative feminine. A lot of gamma males will have that. And so a lot of these traits, and even the explosive anger and this explosive emotion, this unbridled emotion is yin. Because it's like the ocean, it's just crashing wave,
uncontrolled,
no control. And it's more masculine to have more of a just equanimity and being able to hold the tension of these emotions without, exploding or expressing the full thing. You don't need to, you can actually contain it, because containership is a masculine yang trait. Framework, container, all of that. So I think a lot of men that I came in contact with the military had really repressed feminine. And you could see that obviously in the military, if you're on a patrol through the woods and you're like, guys, look at this butterfly. Like your respect and your trust and your status in that team is going to go down. You're going to be the crazy guy that's just like soft, airy fairy. Right. So most guys, at least for me, like a lot of guys that I really looked up to had a more integrated feminine where they would actually be like we'd be walking and be like, dude, look at this freaking view. Like, look at this beautiful, like whatever. We could call that out and call attention to beauty and then go right back to like hunting and killing. And hunters are like that. Hunters have a lot of respect and awe and appreciation for the beauty of nature and the beauty of the animals that they're hunting. And then they'll hunt.
Who's a perfect example of like a really integrated man is Mark Divine. Ex-Navy SEAL, super masculine, but he's so integrated. Like he fully embodies like all these feminine aspects of him in such a beautiful way because it's so balanced by his masculinity. He's such a perfect example of that.
And then the quote unquote toxic masculine traits that the military would exhibit, in my opinion, were more the repressed feminine coming out, where they're repressing those softer sides. And then any little trigger, any look the wrong way, and they're like, you want to go, man? Like they're just always looking for a fight, easily offended. Yeah, there was people in boot camp I remember particularly well where it's like, if I just was running a little bit faster than them and went around, the next time I saw them, they wanted to have a punch on because they saw that as like a slight. So they're so easily damaged, easily bruised.
But what you say is, because I had never heard this before until Isaac said this, and I've never heard anyone say it even since. Like, I think this is just based on your own experience, and it's so important for you to share this, I feel, is that, Isaac said to me, I think that toxic masculinity is actually just repressed feminine. Like it's when men repress their feminine and it gets called toxic masculinity, but it's actually very feminine traits.
More like toxic femininity.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because I think that's true.
Yeah.
That's definitely resonates.
And I think it's the same thing on the female side. When you get the women that are quote toxic feminine, it's more toxic masculine traits that's coming out. They want to dominate. They want to fucking, and domination isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's part of the polarity,
but it's part of,
but when it comes out in ugly ways, that's where it's toxic.
But I think that is more of the toxic, because even the masculine, like if you want to talk about sort of divine masculine doesn't dominate.
I don't know. I think divine masculine, I think divine masculine is more toxic. I think divine feminine is more toxic.
Divine masculine doesn't dominate. I think that is more of the toxic, because even the masculine, like if you want to talk about sort of divine masculine doesn't dominate.
I don't know, when you have an enemy or something that needs to be clobbered.
Yeah, but in terms of, I'm
it.
talking about in relationship dynamics. Like in a
Right.
relationship dynamic, the masculine shouldn't be dominating the
Unless
feminine.
you're in the bedroom.
And another, we're mentioning so many people, and most of the people we've mentioned in this episode, we've done interviews with them, so go back and listen. But Leanne Lapinto talks about this so beautifully, about the feminine masculine dynamics within relationship, and how within the polarity community, it's really been taken out of, not even out of context, but it's been taken to this extreme that's very unnatural, where like men have to be in their masculine 100% of the time and women have to be in their feminine 100% of the time. That's just not true. Like if you look at the yin yang symbol, the yin and the yang each have one of the other within them. Now it's not a huge part, it's just a little bit, but they have to have a little bit of each other within them. And that's exactly the same as us.
And that really goes to how you're able to create more of a balance within yourself to take care of yourself. The native warriors, where I come from in Wyoming, there's a place called Medicine Bow National Forest, and they called it big medicine, nature. And the beauty of nature, I've talked about that in a feminine sense. And there was a Navy, or not Navy SEAL, it's a Special Forces guy, the guy that actually started Black Rifle Coffee. I remember talking about this, and I was like, yeah, he's right onto it, where he spent probably the cumulative amount of time. It was either over 10 years or 20 years, extreme amount of time in combat zones. And when he would come home, like these native warriors, he would go into the forest, into the big medicine. And just that time of connecting back with the feminine, with the land, with Mother Nature, so to speak, was very, very healing. And I think is part of that success, and why someone like him, who could see so much ugly combat, would also just continue forward with a new mission and not be stuck down with like massive depression and debilitating addictions and stuff. The feminine will nurture and heal what the masculine kind of wrecks sometimes. It's a very strong counterbalance, and we need that. And the same thing with women, when they're very, very soft and can be a little bit, I don't know. You'd have to speak more to that, what the healing nature of the masculine is to the feminine.
Well, yeah. And so from my experience, and again, this is why this is so important. And this is going to be a big piece of the coaching program we do, is really getting people to fully understand. Like, I just think there's so much that's misunderstood with the masculine feminine polarity and dynamics, not just within relationship, but within ourselves first and foremost. Because for me, again, I didn't have any real awareness. I learned about sort of yin, yang, and the different qualities when I was studying nutrition. So this was going on like maybe 8 years ago now, was when I first sort of was introduced to it, but still didn't really get, you hear masculine, feminine, but I just thought it's like one or the other. Women are feminine, men are masculine. It was very basic understanding. And in the last few years, I've really dived into it. And when we were first sort of talking, we'd moved past the friendship stage, but that was a huge part of like the beginning of our relationship, was me really starting to explore that, because I realized that I've been more in my masculine energy for a big chunk of my life for varying reasons. Like, just to name a few, just because I just think it can help to share when people might see some of the same things showing up for them. But my relationship with my dad affected that. My relationships affected that, because essentially I wasn't feeling safe within, I didn't feel provided and protected for fully. I didn't feel that my partners, not so much, not all of them, but definitely there are a couple that, again, I didn't understand this at the time, but definitely more of that feminine, uncontrolled emotion. That was my first relationship, was very much like that. So when a woman doesn't feel safe like that, you're going to be in your masculine energy because you have to protect yourself. So that was a big one. And then, of course, during the time I was single, I lived alone a lot. I worked, I had to provide for myself. So for me, I really had to, again, firstly, understand the concept, understand the different qualities of masculine, feminine, look at how it was showing up for me in my life, and how, I guess I started exploring more of my femininity and what that looks like for me. Because I do believe very strongly that it's different for everyone. My femininity is different to my girlfriend's femininity, or my mom's, or how it shows up in different people. And my masculine qualities, how they show up in me, is very different to how it's going to show up in another woman as well. So understanding that. And then again, it comes back to the integration. So integrating, we don't repress either side. Like I think I tried to do, as we tend to do a lot of the time, is do the pendulum swing and kind of be like, oh, well, I need to be more feminine and go the other way.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't want to repress your masculine qualities because they're still a part of you.
I need to roll my sleeves up more. I need to get like some steroids going. I'm going to shave my head. Yeah. It's like, as opposed to a persona, it's just a balanced knowing and a stable footing on who you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And letting those parts interplay. And then with us, like there's times where your masculine stepped up and were like mine were butting heads. Like when I was, you know, the Mexico thing with the car, you know, it's just funny things, but it's all the part of learning, like where it's like, all right, I can actually let my masculine sit down for a little bit. I can step into a little bit of passivity, even though I'm like sitting there. I'm just like, I don't feel comfortable, but I'm going to sit here as a passenger in the car, just waiting to arrive.
Mind you, he's talking about now he can sit comfortably as a passenger. He would not let me drive the stick shift car, the manual car that he'd only ever driven a manual once or twice before in his whole life. I drove a manual car for like 10 years of my life, 15 years of my life, something like that. He would not let me drive it. And he was like grinding the gears. And it was actually, I just arrived in a new country.
I was very highly confident, even though my skills were down here.
My nervous system was like, whoa. Like I was a bit of a wreck and he wouldn't anyway, but you know, it's all learning. It's funny. We've got great stories from the travels, but you were definitely like very stubborn and like, I was like, just let me drive. And he's like, no,
I'm providing, I'm protecting.
Yeah, I'm the man.
Well, also it was like, you know, it was different side of the road. I was kind of worried that
I would have been fine.
Drive
babe.
us into a semi truck.
I would have been fine. I'm actually a great driver, and I actually put that down.
That's where her masculine is. Yeah,
100%. Because I get the whole bad female driver thing. Because I know lots of really bad female drivers. I'm actually a great driver, and I thank my masculine qualities for that. So yeah, it's all about integration. And honestly, we could talk about the masculine feminine thing forever, and it is definitely going to be a big piece in our coaching program because it's definitely definitely a huge missing link, I think, in a lot of relationships, and just it definitely comes from a place of, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around it.
Yeah, there's a lot of bullshit out there too.
All right, last but certainly not least is codependency. So we already touched on this a little bit. This was a huge one for me in my previous relationships, I think for you as well in yours. Mm-hmm. And a big one that we see in like now that I know what it is and like fully understand how it showed up in my relationships, I see it so clearly in other people's relationships. So again, want to break this one down a little bit. So the actual definition is referring to a dysfunctional relationship dynamic where one person excessively prioritizes the needs of another, often at the expense of their own well-being. This pattern typically involves enabling behaviors, low self-esteem, and difficulty setting personal boundaries. Whoa, that was so mean in my previous relationships.
Yeah. And I think that came from, because I did a deep dive on that when I was learning about this a bit more, because I didn't think of myself as codependent. I remember a friend of mine put me onto this and he's like, bro, you got to read this book or you got to do something. He sent me a book and it actually clicked. But the codependency thing, it was in the context of a codependent and a narcissist behavior. There's a bit of a dynamic there, a bit of a common thing that happens with those two energies attracting each other. But once I realized, like that's what codependency actually means. Yeah. I was like, yeah, that's unfortunately part of my experience. And it's uncomfortable when you confront that part where you're just like, oh, like that's something that I see other people doing. And I'm like, oh God, I could never live like that. And then I realize, wow, I'm actually doing some of those same things. But you can't get out of it if you can't see it. Yeah, and exactly. The more you willfully stay blind, which is what I was doing. Yeah. It's just God awful. It's so awful because I've been there and I'm not judging other people, but I've been there. When you see somebody just making the same mistake over and over again and not really like picking their head up, not knowing their worth, not knowing that they deserve better, that they have more capacity for greater things, and just seeing them hit themselves in the face over and over again. It's like, yeah, it's painful to watch. So some signs of codependency, because I think this can be helpful for people, again, like listening to this and because again, like you can't
often see what's right in front of you, especially if you're in it, like if you're in the relationship or you're in the situation. But when someone kind of lays it out and explains it and gives you like clear points, sometimes you're like, holy shit, like I tick all those boxes. Or you can just look back on previous relationships and see if it showed up, because again, previous relationships can often show like the patterns. You start to see really clear patterns. So excessive caretaking, I did this. Again, the trauma triangle comes into this. It's like if you're constantly the savior, they're the victim. That's a huge part of codependency. And then, so the enabler derives their sense of closeness and love from helping and rescuing the enabled person. They enjoy being needed and find a sense of purpose and identity in being a caretaker. This used to be me to a T. And then on the other hand, the enabled person feels loved and validated when they're receiving help and support from the enabler, often the victim. They may become dependent on this support to cope with their distress, and this dependence reinforces their own sense of inadequacy. So this is why too, the codependency, obviously it's codependent. So it does take two to tango. There has to be two people within a codependent relationship. Low self-esteem. So codependent individuals typically have low self-worth and seek validation and approval from their partner to feel better about themselves. Enabling behavior. So again, this could look like a lot of different things. So they give some examples here. So giving money to the enabled person to cover their expenses, making excuses or covering for the enabled person when they fail to fulfill their responsibilities, tolerating mistreatment, abuse, or neglect, offering constant emotional support and reassurance even when the other person's behavior is harmful. So yeah, that one's pretty self-explanatory. And that's also a huge one in obviously abusive relationships where they just continue to enable the behavior. Difficulty with assertiveness. So this is like the lack of boundaries, huge one in codependent relationships.
Where do you think that comes from? Is that from on one side, someone that's maybe turned off by people that are assertive because of maybe like an abusive parent or an overbearing parent?
Assertiveness, to me, the biggest problem with that is people pleasing. People pleasing is a behavior that's formed usually quite early on in life, and it's to do with a lot of our conditioning. A
sense of like low self-worth. So you need to please people in order to be accepted.
Well, also just because it's the way we're conditioned to behave generally in society. So when we go to school, we're taught to be polite. Part of being polite is often not saying how you really feel about something or not expressing your needs. And I think because the people pleasing is such a huge one because it can come through so many different avenues. So we're definitely conditioned that way through school. It's a big one in religious programming, the workplace, even like the way that we behave in a workplace. And then often like societally, we see people that are assertive. Well, that's the thing. There's a big difference between assertive and aggressive, but quite often being assertive is then perceived as being aggressive. So we think that that's bad. So it's quite often, very much learned early in life. I think that's a huge one, but obviously it's very nuanced. I'm sure there's a million other reasons why people lack. But within relationship, I've got to say though, like the difficulty with assertiveness, that's where the boundaries come in. And again, just taking it back to, if you're not clear on what you want in your partner and in a relationship, you're not going to have clear boundaries. You know what I mean? And I can speak from experience with that, where I don't think I ever had any boundaries. I was like, because I didn't not like, how do I put it? It was like I didn't set the boundary until it had already been crossed. And then by that point, it's too late because then the behavior starts and then it becomes a pattern. And so you can keep saying no and trying to set the boundary, but it's too far gone because you didn't have that strong boundary within yourself first. Because if I did have the strong boundaries to start with, I probably never would have ended up in any of the relationships I ended up in. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what this reminds me of. It was working with horses with my mom. My mom was a horse trainer. And you need to be very clear on boundaries with the horses. And if you saw the way that she does the horse training, some people might be a little triggered by it because it can be very like iron-handed. But you have to remember, especially as a woman, you need to make very clear the horse, like little signals. You learn their body behaviors. When you see them put their ears back, sometimes you can tell that they're just kind of like being like fidgety or whatever. Sometimes that is a very clear signal that they're about to do something that's going to hurt you or somebody else. And it can be very bad. Like you can get really, really hurt because they're massive animals and they don't always know their strength. So they might even just knock you like that and it could totally knock you out, or they'll buck you off, or they'll kick you in the face like what happened to me when I was a kid. So you learn to be assertive with them as soon as they start like dipping their head and kind of like putting their ears back, you go, yeah, like you get their attention, you like really shock them out of it, or like smack them, or, whatever the right thing is to do. And if, as a horse trainer, there's a specific reason and you know what to do and what not to do. Sometimes smacking them is the opposite of what you want to do. Sometimes if you don't, they'll like seriously hurt you. So setting those boundaries and being very clear on it, and also holding the boundary. Yeah. Once you set it, just setting it doesn't mean it's going to be it's going to change behavior. You have to enforce it.
Exactly.
And that enforcing of the behavior, enforcing of the boundary is looked at in society, I think, as aggressive. Because it's like I told you, we're not doing this. I'm not, whatever. I'm not letting you do this to me or my family or whatever. And if you do, this is the consequences.
Yeah.
And then when they actually push that and then they get the consequences, then they're like, oh, why are you being so mean? You're so rude. You're so angry. It's like, that's what enforcement looks like.
And I've got to say too, even though I didn't set the boundaries at all early in the relationship and probably really struggled to do so within them, I've got to say once I hit sort of a breaking point where I'd had enough in my relationships, I always stuck to my word. Where I, in my first relationship, I said, I'm not doing this anymore. If this happens again, we're done. And the next time it happened, we were done. And he begged, he tried to come back, and I was like, no, if I say, like, I actually remember saying to him, I think you think I just speak to hear my own voice, which is funny now knowing I'm a self-projected projector.
You do speak to your own voice.
But no,
but you also mean it.
I'm a woman of my word. And that's sometimes the boundary means that you have to walk away. Like sometimes that is the boundary. Sometimes it's like, if this gets crossed, then it's over. And sometimes, it's a really hard thing to do, but
and that's where having that integrated masculine as a woman is important.
Yeah.
Because
absolutely.
Yeah. You're not going to go through a lot of the bullshit in a relationship that others might tolerate.
Yeah. And then one last sign of codependency in a relationship is trust and control issues, which this was a huge one for me too. Codependents may resort to controlling or manipulative behaviors as a way to maintain the relationship or cope with their own fears and insecurities. You're so lucky that I've not been like this in our relationship. You might see glimpses of it. I feel here and there.
I wouldn't cope well, I don't think.
But I used to be very controlling, and like not in a super overt way. And it's funny too, because I wasn't a conniving, manipulative person, just because that's just not me as a person anyway. But I definitely can see looking back how sometimes I think I was a bit emotionally manipulative. But again, it didn't come from a malicious place. I think it came from this place of like wanting them to see me, like wanting them to like feel how I feel. You know what I mean? Because I felt like I wasn't ever seen or heard a lot of the time. But yeah, I was definitely way more controlling with a lot of things. And I think it was because I felt so out of control in the relationship because there was just so much going on. And so I was always trying to control the situation, trying to control the other person.
Yeah. And there's a conversation in there somewhere about men that are protective or controlling and how to differentiate between them because of, with their coming online of authentic masculinity that's kind of trying to make a resurgence, but it's also a bit lost in the weeds of, the whole trad wife, trad life thing. And I think there's still elements there that people aren't aware of. They're still looking for the two separate, I'm a masculine, I'm a feminine or whatever.
And that's very much the pendulum swing too, right? Because, we've gone from women can have it all and work and have kids and be more like men.
Yeah.
And then the pendulum swing is to do the whole trad wife thing, like traditional, because I didn't know what that was for a long time, like more the traditional where the woman stays home and cooks and cleans and looks after the kids. And like, there's nothing wrong with that, but then what's happening, and I've heard of this happening where they're doing the pendulum swing and then they're realizing, well, that's not for them either. Whether it's because they want to pursue, they actually do want to work because of something that's like their soul calling or like something that's actually their purpose or whatever it may be, that actually doesn't work for them. So it's not about just going from one to the other. It's, about integrating both these masculine, feminine aspects and figuring out what's right for you without trying to over-identify with either or.
Yeah. And it's definitely something you continue to learn and get better at and grow with time. So, but like setting boundaries or things like that, I think are taken as controlling in relationships sometimes, with the man saying like, no, you're not doing this, or this, like you're saying a particular, because one thing that comes up is a common thing for some people in relationships where the wife has her girlfriends and they want to go out and have a girls' night. That's totally fine and normal if it stays within certain boundaries. And I've definitely been in relationships where it crossed the boundaries, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to go have girls' night. And it's like, I don't know, like drugs and getting totally wasted and like ending up with some other guys and like shit like that. Obviously not okay. So,
and this has come up for us where I've said like, you know, I went to a bachelorette party and like we had the best time, and I've had my partying heyday. Like I have no desire for it whatsoever. But if I'm on a bachelorette party, I'm going to have drinks and have a fun time and like without going overboard, because I've been overboard, and that's where I'm just like, I don't have any desire to do that anymore. And, you know, I've said before like, oh, we'd love to do that girls trip like once a year, like with that same group of girls. And you're like, oh, I don't know about that. Like going out and
guys, if like, don't let your women leave the country and go partying without you. It's so dangerous. I'm not even joking. There's like human trafficking is a real fucking thing. All right. Let's just put that
hang
out
on.
there.
The setting we were in Mexico was like an all-inclusive resort where like it's a gated resort. Like it's very safe.
Yeah.
And
like
we wouldn't
fish in
just
a barrel is what I think.
And we wouldn't just go out willy-nilly. But we've spoken about that. And again, like this is where I think trust is so important in a relationship. Actually, surprisingly, we didn't mention that at all. But like, I definitely didn't have a high level of trust in any of my previous relationships like I do now with us.
Yeah.
And like in situations like that, that's where it's so important, because you know, and I know, like at the core of who we are, like I know that it doesn't matter how, like, say you're out on a boys' night, you got super trash, which you wouldn't. Like you would never go and cheat on me. You would never, like, you know what I mean? Unless you were like passed out and some chick like raped you. Is that a thing?
It's possible.
Do men get raped?
Yeah, I guess it is possible.
Like it's not a thing. But even that's obviously worst case scenario. But even with me, like you trust that because I trust in myself. Like I trust in myself that I don't get like that bachelorette trip that I did.
It's not so much about like risk of you like cheating or whatever. It's more like just like credible threats to your safety. That's the bigger thing. Are you going to get roofied? Are you going out to places and clubs and stuff like that where that's pretty common? Because that's a real risk these days. So unfortunately,
but it's also just I know, but it's also just trusting that again, like there's the masculine, you know, qualities within me that I know, and I'm very street smart. Like I've been around the block a couple of times, babe. We've had very different life experiences, and that's just something that's like, I'm like all over that stuff, and but anyway, we digress. But
but definitely open those up, and having the conversation will build trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you have to have, and the last time we spoke about it, we actually said, well, why don't we all go like the husbands and wives, and you guys go and have like a boys trip. Yeah. And so that we're all in the same vicinity. So that if we're overseas and something happens, like our men are there, but we're actually off kind of separate, which is like, that's a great compromise. Like it's a fun time for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Finding ways to compromise. That was another thing I had one of these trad guys tell me one time. It's like, I never compromise with my wife because I'm a man. It's like, dude, I'm sure she's having a terrible time with that, because you have to compromise sometimes. You can't just be like, I mean, granted, there might be some wounded place where, you know, it's, or even not wounded. Maybe some women just like totally having the man make every decision. There is possibilities where some women are actually more comfortable with that. It's not very common, but I'm sure there's some. So that could work for you. Yeah. As long as it's done in like a peaceful, loving manner. And it's not like, you know, I said we're having biscuits and roast tonight. And it's like throws the plate off the table.
No, well, actually, and this will be my last point, because we really got to wrap up here, but that's such an important point to make, because I will say I'm a recovering feminist. I was definitely so conditioned towards that feminist perspective of,
I didn't know you were a lesbian.
Men and I'm just kidding. And I definitely, like, even in my last relationship, I was starting to soften with this, but again, because there was a level of trust with that person where like even just jokes about like, oh, you're just a woman, like get in the kitchen, you're just a woman. And I would get so triggered, like I would get so annoyed, but it was always done in a really playful way. But I realized that I actually internally would feel so angry and like, we're so much more than that, whatever. And like, actually, that's been a huge shift in our relationship. Again, like with the masculine, feminine polarity and the dynamic, I'm so much more comfortable allowing you to take the reins, but also knowing that I don't have to give up my power and totally give up my control, because there are lots of times where you will come to me and say, well, what do you think of this, before you make a decision on it. And that's what I think really like forms such a solid relationship, is when that is the dynamic, when the man can lead, but the decisions are based on what they both want in the relationship. Like what, like the woman's opinion and feeling on things is taken into consideration. Cause that's where I think like what I used to always think is like, well, the man's going to lead and he's just going to do what he wants. And some men do that. Like some men do that. And that's why they're in these really dysfunctional relationships, because they totally disregard their woman.
Yeah,
and
but that's not, I would argue that's not even true leadership.
Exactly. That's exactly. I totally agree.
Management is telling people what to do.
Yeah.
And leadership is more inspiring your team to be their best.
Yeah. 100%.
And I think that's what a true leader should. I would say men must lead, but in the way that I'm talking about, as far as inspiring your team to be the best, the leader takes responsibility for everything. And both of us need to lead ourselves and lead in our own particular roles.
Exactly.
But the man as the leader is not a higher status than the woman. It's more of like a good leader is also a very good servant. And they're thinking constantly about the well-being of the tribe or the family and fulfilling what you need, but also being aware to be able to step out of the, my personal situation and look at you and be like, maybe she's working really hard and she's getting disconnected from her body. Let me find gentle ways to remind her to go out into nature, to maybe do some breath work, or maybe let's schedule her a spa day or something like that. And you're like guiding and leading, but it's not done in the way that people typically. It's not telling me what
to do. Yeah. Because that's a huge thing. Like, I mean, I'm a woman and I'm a Taurus sun, so you can't tell me what to do.
Yeah.
I don't respond well to that. I'm literally like a bull out of a gate. If you try and tell me what to do, it's not going to go down well. But
speaking of which, isn't it? It's about sandwich 30. So if you could just get up in the
yeah. Well, obviously we could talk on this topic for hours, but I hope that this was valuable to people. I hope that if you're maybe questioning some things in your relationship, or there's things coming up for you in your relationship that you're finding hard to navigate or not sure how to navigate, like I hope that this gives some insight into just some of the things that can show up. And these are just some of our experiences. And I know I've learned a lot from so many other people sharing their experiences across a lot of different things. Yeah. So this is super exciting for us to step into the coaching space with this stuff. So stay tuned for that. We'll definitely keep you updated. Yeah. And we'll catch everyone on the next one.
Thanks for your time. And I feel like the outro song should be, I've been everywhere, man. Because I feel like I've made every mistake in the book in relationships. But I'm starting to look at it differently now. Like mistakes are not all that I thought they were. So it's been a learning curve, and thank you for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to the Natural AF podcast, where we explore holistic healing modalities, mindsets, and methods that reconnect us to nature and our natural state of being.
If something resonated, share this episode and see the show notes for our guest links, as well as all of our discount codes for our aligned affiliates and natural art form, where we handcraft a range of organic, natural remedies to help support your body's natural healing abilities and help support the show.
If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please take a few seconds to leave us a rating and review. And if you're watching on Rumble or YouTube, hit the like button and drop us a comment, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for the latest updates.
We're not here to conform. We're here to remember what's real. So step into your power, be curious, and be natural AF.